Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Want to go ahead and give you a post-weekend college hoops transfer portal update. And listen, bottom line is I do think it's kind of that time of year where we're probably going to be doing these a couple times a week now. Portal has been open for 2 weeks now, since the day after Selection Sunday. And kind of bluntly, it's the time where we're starting to get some real information. Guys have been in the portal for a week or two now. They're starting to create lists, cut lists, make visits, commits, etc. And oh, by the way, players still have over a month to enter the transfer portal still, or about a month from now. So the bottom line remains is that we're going to have a lot of information coming really fast. So let's go ahead and update the transfer portal. Everything you need to know, everything you missed from over the course of this past weekend. First off, I think you could argue one of the 2 or 3 biggest early commitments that we have seen so far became official. And that was on Sunday, Easter Sunday, when Riley Kugel from Florida, he was a key reserve at Florida. Well, he committed to Kansas. And if you listen to our last portal update, which I believe dropped Thursday, maybe Wednesday, I can't, all the days are starting to run together at this point. But the last portal update we did, I said bluntly, I said this felt like the spot for Riley Kugel. Let me explain why. So first off, what has become clear this offseason is a couple things. Bill Self said we've been preparing for next season for a month now, and I totally believe it, because they have gone heavy in the portal, and as we discussed last week, have contacted about 3, 4, 5 different guards, so it's clear the backcourt is the priority. As for Kugel himself, why I said last week that I thought Kansas was the spot, I mean, sometimes you've just been doing this long enough where you kind of get a sense for what's going on, even if you don't actually know. But this was a kid that entered the portal on Wednesday. By Thursday, he put out a top 4 list of teams. And what was crazy was this. The top 4 was Kansas, Houston, UConn, and Arizona. So one, if you enter the portal and you're totally open to listening to everybody, you don't put out a top 4 and a final 4. That was the thing. He said, I'm going to focus on these 4 schools the day after you enter the portal. I would also add, talked to somebody I trust in Arizona. I don't believe there was ever contact from Arizona. Didn't really make sense. The fit for UConn, kind of the same with Houston. And so I assumed it would be Kansas. It was Kansas. And let me give Bill Self credit. He said he wanted to upgrade this roster. He said he wanted difference makers, and he got his first big one of the offseason on Sunday. Kugel, listen, the numbers aren't going to blow you away. He was basically Florida's 6th man last year. Now, what's interesting about him, he was actually, you could argue maybe his best year was as a freshman 2 seasons ago, averages just under 10 points per game, 38% shooter from 3. He comes back this year, and he's kind of the odd man out. Remember, Florida brought in Walter Clayton. They brought in Zion Pullen. And so I just bring it up because he was kind of the guy that got kind of pushed to the bench. I thought he was a very valuable piece for them, but clearly he wanted a bigger role. Now he's going to Kansas. Averaged 9.2 points per game. As I said, he can shoot the basketball. I think he's a really good kind of off-the-ball secondary guard. Obviously, DeJuan Harris can come back for Kansas next year unless I'm misreading his eligibility. I think you put Riley Kugel in the backcourt, this can be an explosive 14, 15-point-a-game scorer, all Big 12 kind of guy. So great first get for Kansas. And again, if you read the tea leaves, it doesn't feel like they are done. Now, they got some big things coming up there. Is Hunter Dickinson going to use his extra year? Is Johnny Furphy going to go pro? Should mention, by the way, we're recording here about 7 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. Stuff changes fast. My guess is if Dickinson comes back, maybe Furphy, we'll see. His NBA draft stock is kind of all over the place. Then I think the focus is on shoring up that backcourt. But credit Bill Self. He said, I ain't playing around. Said we've been focusing on the offseason for a while now. He gets his first big fish on Sunday. Speaking of big commitments, you knew Arkansas was going to be fast and furious in the portal. Coach Muss is always aggressive. He always wants to bring in a bunch of new pieces. And bluntly, obviously this year there was no postseason, right? So you think about how hard he moves and how quickly he moves in the portal when his team is playing on the second weekend, which they have the last 3 years. This year, they're not. And so they have obviously been very aggressive in the portal. They get their first commitment over the weekend on Friday afternoon. It comes from Josh Cohen, a 7-foot center who played last year at UMass and prior to that was at St. Francis of PA. He will be a 6th-year guy next year, grown man. I just think he's a really good fit for what Arkansas wants to do. Averaged 16 points per game this past season, 7 boards. I know Arkansas fans are always intrigued by, can you shoot the 3 ball? Didn't take a ton of threes, but 34% on the 3-pointers that he did attempt. He attempted about 30 this year for a 7-footer. 35% on 33-point attempts ain't bad. That's about 1 per game. And so, listen, I think this is a very good piece for Arkansas. Athletic, he rebounds, he competes, he can space the floor. He's kind of that new age big that you sort of had with Trevin Brazile this year, but obviously Trevin Brazile was dealing with injuries, whatever. I think this kid's going to be very good at Arkansas. Now, what will be interesting is, of course, what happens next at Arkansas beyond this. Obviously, we know a couple guys are gone from Arkansas. Devo Davis is in the portal. Joseph Pinion, I believe, has already committed. Layden Blocker is gone. But I think the big question for Arkansas, can you get back those 2 stars, Caleb Battle and Tremont Mark? Caleb Battle, because Arkansas was struggling, I don't think people realize Caleb Battle was like one of the best guards in college basketball over the final 2 or 3 weeks of the season. Put up 42 against Missouri, 34 against Kentucky, 32 against Vandy. He was playing as well as any guard in college basketball. And then also, I've kind of heard like Tremont Mark, the leading scorer for Arkansas, may be back as well. He averaged 16 points per game this season. So you bring back Mark, you bring back Battle. I believe Battle may be testing the draft waters. You bring those guys back. You now have a big piece in the middle to complement them. I think that's the core of a pretty good team to start 2024, 2025 on top of everything else you're about to do in the portal. Now, we know Arkansas is going to bring in a bunch more guys. One name that I have heard linked to them, I saw he actually met with the staff virtually last week. That would be Keyshawn Hall, who played this past season at George Mason. 6'7" wing, a guy who's kind of bounced around. He was at George Mason last year, started his career at UNLV. I'll tell you this, I know people that have been around Keyshawn Hall, works like a pro, trains like a pro, acts like a guy that wants to be in the NBA. He averaged 17 points, 8 boards this past season for George Mason in the A-10. He entered the portal. First, I had kind of heard, one, he was going to test the draft waters. Then I sort of heard some Providence, Big East type stuff. But I believe Arkansas has made an impression on him. We'll see if they can close the deal. One team I want to talk about. They have not officially landed a commitment yet, and they might not. But the University of Kentucky is as interesting as anyone in the portal. And it's really for 2 reasons. One, first off, I should mention, last week we talked about Adu Thiero entering the portal. We talked about the fact that, he kind of publicly expressed, hey, I'm just checking all my options. I'm going to test the draft waters, going to test the portal, but I have not ruled out the possibility of coming back to Kentucky. Let the record show, I am on Team Adu. I will tell you right now, I think one of the most important priorities for John Calipari is, listen, this guy wants to go to the pros. You wish him support. If he's coming back to play college basketball next year, you need that guy. But I bring it up because it is clear that I think Kentucky is going to be a little bit more aggressive in the portal this offseason. Remember, last offseason, they basically said, we got all these freshmen coming in. We got DJ Wagner. We got we got Rob Dillingham. We got Reed Shepard. We got a couple front court guys. We have to let the freshmen cook and learn on the fly, kind of, for lack of a better term. So they weren't aggressive in the portal. This year's a little different. They do have a bunch of high school recruits coming in, but the backcourt is kind of thin. Travis Perry's coming in, Kentucky High School Player of the Year, all-time leading scorer. Also on top of that, Boogie Flan, the 5-star out of New York. But once you get past those 2, a little bit of a thinner backcourt, especially if you assume that Wagner, Dillingham, and Reed Shepard are all going pro. I don't think it's 100% definitive, but I think if you were a betting person, if you could bet on such things, they probably are. And so because of it, you have to start looking at other options. And I don't know that Travis Perry and Boogie Fland are enough. Carter Knox and Billy Richmond, two really talented high school players. They're more wings. So you got to focus on the backcourt. And it is clear, based on early reports, that that is a priority for Kentucky, is bringing in at least one, maybe more veteran guards. The big news from Monday, Meechie Johnson, maybe one of the most established players in the portal. So he's a 4-year guy, began at Ohio State, goes to South Carolina. He was as big of a reason as anybody as to why South Carolina ends up making the NCAA tournament this year as a 6th seed. He was their leading scorer, 14 points per game, shot about 33% from the three. And it was interesting. We talked about this last week, the idea of him entering the portal. Didn't really make sense at the time, didn't really kind of understand it. It doesn't really matter, though. He entered, and the question was, is he using this as leverage to get more from South Carolina? I mentioned last week that the Ohio State Collective did the old eyeball emoji tweet. So you wonder if maybe they've been working behind the scenes to maybe get something done. But on Monday, Meechie Johnson did put out a list through Joe Tipton. That list included Texas A&M, Arkansas, Ohio State, and Kentucky. And so you have Meechie Johnson, Kentucky has at least reached out to. Veteran guard, 14 points per game, 33% from three. That's the kind of veteran that for a young team would be very beneficial to bring in. Also worth noting, according to reports, they have reached out to BJ Freeman, an all-conference guard that played this past year at Milwaukee. 6'6", averaged 21 points per game, 6 boards, kind of that bigger guard, kind of that Antonio Reeves type player, 35% shooting from three. And here's the interesting thing about him is that he only has just recently completed his 2nd year of college basketball. So you wonder, is he on that Antonio Reeves trajectory of come in for a year or two and to be good your 1st year and then be that dude your 2nd year? So BJ Freeman has been reached out to. Meechie Johnson has been reached out to. Also worth noting, a player named Jordan Ivy Curry. Listen, if you're some combination of Jordan and Curry, that's not a bad thing, but he is a guard from UTSA. Jordan Ivy Curry, as I just said, a guy that this past season, he's a smaller guard, averaged 17 points per game, shot 39% from three, 6'3", 4 years in the books, has a COVID year, so he would be a 1-year plug-and-play kind of guy. But again, it is clear that Kentucky is prioritizing veteran guards, at least one or two, to complement the freshmen that are coming in. Really quickly, another name that Kentucky has reached out to that I think is at least worth talking about really quick, Cliff Omoyori. Did you see this? So Cliff Omoyori was one of the early guys to enter the transfer portal. He played the last 4 years at Rutgers, okay? Really, listen, I'll just be honest. I don't think he's like, a program-changing type player, but 4 years in the power conferences, he has averaged double figures in the last 3. And oh, by the way, he is a guy that averaged 10.5 and 8.5 this year in the Big Ten. Those numbers actually down from 2 seasons ago when he averaged 13 and 10 for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. The year, by the way, he played with Cam Spencer, who is now, of course, at UConn. I bring it up. Cliff Omoyori, he was a guy that even before the portal opened, kind of hurt. He's got an extra year of eligibility. If you remember, Rutgers is bringing in 2 5-star prospects, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. I think a lot of those older veteran guys say, listen, I don't want to be some role player for a bunch of freshmen. I want to go somewhere where I can have an impact. And what's interesting about Omoyori is that he entered the portal. There was a lot of St. John's buzz early, and there was even speculation that he was going to visit St. John's upon entering the portal. Visit gets canceled, and what I've heard, some of those big boys have come into the mix, and some of those big boys are starting to express interest in Omoyori. Kansas, Kentucky, UConn, who I just mentioned, of course, has a former Rutgers player in Cam Spencer. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I have any super insightful, details on his recruitment, but I'll tell you, this is how some of this portal stuff goes down sometimes. Is a guy enters, I think he has an idea of where he wants to go. Then he hits the portal and it's like, oh, Kentucky's interested? Kansas is interested? I might have to take that visit. I might have to make that Zoom call. I might have to take this phone call. So keep an eye on him. He is a very interesting prospect who, of course, is now suddenly available. Really quickly, a couple new names that have entered the portal. One just entered literally as I was getting ready to record, and it is a name, if you're a college basketball fan, you know. Vlad Golden, who has played the last 3 years at Florida Atlantic. Interesting story. He began his career at Texas Tech. He's there for, I believe, just a semester. That was the last year of Chris Beard. Transfers out, ends up at Florida Atlantic. You don't really know much about him. And then all of a sudden, last year when Florida Atlantic's going to the Final Four, this is a star player who averaged 10.5 points, 6.5 boards per game. He comes back. He is even better this year for the Florida Atlantic Owls. Averaged 16 points per game, 7 boards per game, a little under 2 blocks per game. Listen, this is a legit 7-footer, a legit guy that can control the paint, block shots, and listen, he committed to Texas Tech out of high school. He is a guy who, on top of committing and playing at Texas Tech, thrived at Florida Atlantic. He can play in the power conferences, and now I think it will be interesting to see if, in fact, he is pursued by all these power conference schools. I think he instantly becomes one of the best, most important players in the portal because you just can't get that kind of size and spacing, size and athleticism pretty much anywhere. But I also think the question that everyone's going to be asking, and I think it's totally fair, I don't have an answer to it, is there going to be an actual recruitment for him, or is he going to follow Dusty May to Michigan? Again, I think this is one of those things that you think, you see it, you kind of think like, oh, he's just going to follow Dusty May. And he may very well. But what ends up happening, these guys enter the portal, maybe a bag gets dropped that they didn't think was getting dropped. Maybe they're going to make more money somewhere else. Maybe a dream school that they never thought would be interested is interested. Vlad Golden is now available. Lastly, I thought this was a very interesting name from over the weekend. Pop Isaacs, who played the last 2 years at Texas Tech, now in the transfer portal. Lead guard as a true freshman 2 years ago. This was one of the best freshmen in the Big 12. 11.5 points per game, 2.5 assists per game, 38% from three. This year, some of those numbers went up under Grant McCasland, but 15 points per game, 3.5 assists per game. The shooting numbers did go down, 34% from the field, 29% from three. He decides to enter the portal. So it's not often you get a lead guard who has been a very productive player in a conference like the Big 12 decides to leave. Don't know exactly what happened. It is worth noting those shooting numbers went down. It felt like the second half of the season, something wasn't quite right. But Pop Isaacs is absolutely a name that you need to know. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day. Also, make sure to turn on those notifications so every time something goes live, you know that that's what's up. Appreciate everybody's support. We'll be back later this week.